All right, so what we'll cover during today's workshop, we'll talk about how to get started with Microsoft Excel, just provide an introduction to working with data in Excel, importing data into Excel, and some of the different features that you can take advantage of. We'll talk about formulas and functions, what those are, how to write those into your cells, how to utilize those with some examples. We'll do an overview of something called the Analysis Tool Pack, which is something that you can use if you're wanting to do different types of data analysis in Excel. And then sort of depending on how much time we have left, we'll do a brief overview of charts, plots, graphs, how to set those up utilizing a data set in Excel. Just due to sort of the amount of time that we have, we won't necessarily be able to go into sort of like um, really deep dive into like any sort of coding or like a bunch of different types of statistical tests in Excel. There's really a ton that you can do, but this will really help you sort of get set up and really help you get going utilizing Excel for your data analysis. All right, so just thinking about what Microsoft Excel is. As many of us know, Microsoft Excel is a spreadsheet software that is developed and maintained by Microsoft. Features calculation, graphing tools, data analysis tools, and a wide variety of other applications. And it's widely considered one of the industry standards for spreadsheet software and is used both in private industry and academia alike. The Microsoft Excel sort of has its origins in a spreadsheet program called Multiplan, which was actually first released in 1982. And subsequent versions of this adopted the Excel name and gradually added the features that we're all very familiar with today, which include toolbars, outlining, 3D charts, etc. It gradually grew in popularity, especially beginning in the early 90s with Excel 5.0. Some different uses for Excel. Excel has a variety of uses in many different disciplines. You can enter data that you collect in the field, in the lab, or through surveys. You can import data that you've collected and save as a text file or a comma-separated values file into another software. Excel allows you to store, organize, and analyze your data using a large variety of formulas, functions, statistical tools, and they are continually growing and adding in the different ways that you can work with and represent your data. So for using Microsoft Excel at Florida State University, if you're a student, faculty, or staff member at Florida State, there are several different options for accessing the software. You can download Excel for free as part of Florida State University's licensed Microsoft Office 365 Pro Plus subscription. So this gives you access to Excel, Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, etc. If you are in either Dirac, Strozier, or the engineering library, we have that available on the desktop. So if you're working on a project and you're in the libraries, we have access to Microsoft Excel along with those other Microsoft Office softwares. If you are working from home or you're working remotely and you don't already have Excel on a computer or a way to necessarily download it or the space, this is also available for free online at the FSU Virtual Lab. If you just Google My FSU VLab, you'll go through the Information Technology Services or ITS page for the VLab, and you'll be able to access several different softwares that the university has a license to. So several different ways that will get you access to the program here at Florida State. All right, so that's an overview of sort of what Excel is, how to access the program here at Florida State. Now we'll start going into some of the different workshop materials. I'm going to turn off my camera because I'm soon going to be kind of looking at a couple different screens, so you would be seeing my head move back and forth. So going to do that. All right, so we'll go through this fairly quickly. If you have any questions on this, please feel free to enter these in. But if you've used Excel before, if you've seen it demonstrated before, you'll probably have an idea of some of these, how Excel is actually arranged. But I'll just go through this through the PowerPoint before we get into the actual software. So whenever you open a new Excel file, you're often going to hear it referred to as a workbook. So your entire sort of thing that you're working in is called a workbook. And this contains one or more worksheets that help you organize your data. So when you open it, you see all these different cells, this kind of different work area. This is your worksheet. The worksheet that you're in is denoted by tabs at the bottom of the screen. So you see here like sheet 1. You'll sometimes have multiple different tabs when you're working on a data set. So these are your tabs. And again, this collection of tabs and worksheets is referred to as a workbook. So within a worksheet, the values are organized by cells, columns, and rows. So this slide sort of points out on sort of a larger view what those columns, rows, and cells look like. But to sort of break that down a little bit more specifically, if you look at this first thing right here, this is what is known as a row. Rows are represented by numbers along the side of the sheet. So if you're ever looking at an Excel worksheet, you'll notice the numbers kind of going along the vertical side of the page. That is how your rows are organized. On the right-hand side, this is what is known as a column. Columns are represented by letters across the top of the sheet, going in alphabetical order, so A, B, C, etc. And then the intersection between a column and a row is what is known as a cell. And this is what you're going to enter your values or your data into. So each cell is named for the column and the row that intersect to make it. So in the example screenshot that I have on the slide here, you'll see we're in column B, row 3. So that gets the moniker cell B3. All right. So now I'm going to actually, for this part, there's sort of an overview here on the quick access toolbar and the menu. I'm actually going to go into the Excel software. So I'm going to share that part of my screen. First, I just want to make sure y'all could confirm this if everybody can see a blank Excel spreadsheet. So if you could just give a thumbs up or say in the chat if you can see that, that way we know that that's good. Awesome. And I will probably ask that a few times throughout because sometimes Zoom, when you're popping to different screens, will sometimes not go on to share the screen that you're wanting to share. So just wanting to make sure that we all can see that. All right, awesome. So as you can see, this is our Excel spreadsheet. We've already talked about our columns, rows, and cells. So Excel's menu system, which is present at the top of the screen, this is often referred to as the ribbon. And this ribbon contains a series of tabs such as Home, Insert, Page Layout, Formulas, Data, etc. And under each tab, there are a number of buttons that allow you to perform various tasks or edit the spreadsheet in some way. Another important part of the menu system, and one that's sometimes a bit overlooked, but can save you a good amount of time, is something that's called the Quick Access Toolbar, which is located at the top left-hand portion of the screen, which here right now you'll see the save icon and this little drop-down arrow. So this allows you to put any buttons on here that you might readily use throughout your work, or something you want to access quickly. And it's especially useful for these frequently used buttons. And so how you add buttons to the toolbar is, let's say we want the auto sum up here. Let's say you use that frequently within your work. If you go over to auto sum, if you right click, there'll be a little pop-up box that comes up, and one of the choices is add to quick access toolbar. If you click that, now you'll see at the top left-hand corner, our auto sum button appears within our quick access toolbar. And you can do this for most buttons on your screen. So say we want our get data button, which we'll be using in just a bit. Say we want to add that to our toolbar. We just right click, add to quick access toolbar, and there it is. And if there's any drop-down choices that go along with that, you'll be able to access that from the quick access toolbar as well. So this is a really, really nice feature in Excel that's particularly useful if you're frequently using different buttons that are in different ribbons, different menus on the screen. Save you a little bit of time, so you have to click back and forth between those. All right, so we talked a little bit about the quick access toolbar. So now, before we get into utilizing our practice data set and some examples that I'm going to show, we'll go over sort of how you enter data, whether that's numerical data or text data, into a cell. There's a couple of primary ways that you can do this. There's a few other ways as well, but I'm going to mainly focus on two. So if you are manually entering values into Excel, you can enter them directly into one of the cells. So if you just click on one of the cells, you'll notice if you double click, you see this cursor that appears, and you can type in a value, say it's 720.04. You can type that directly into the cell. One thing that you'll notice when you do that is, if you look up here in this formula bar, you'll notice if you hover over it, it says it is the formula bar. So that's how you know it is named that, if you do not know that. You will see this value also pop up here. And that is actually another way that you can enter values into a cell. So if you say click on cell A, so column A, row 2, and then you click on the formula bar, you can add that value into your cell from the formula bar. So this is two really great ways to enter values into your cells. You'll see this formula bar used frequently by folks if you're entering in like a function or a different formula. You can also do that directly into the cell as well. But those are sort of two ways that you can enter those in there. And when we get to formulas and functions later, it'll output a value into these cells, but you're always able to check that formula up in the formula bar. So that's also another use for that. All right, so I'm going to go back into our slideshow here. Before I keep going, I just want to stop for a second, see if anyone has any questions. Again, if you do have questions, you can put them in the chat. If you don't have questions, if you could give me a thumbs up or a green check mark sign or something to let me know that you're good. And then we will keep going. All right, it looks like we're good. Thanks, y'all. All right, so for today's workshop, we're going to be working with a data set that I show here on the screen. It's this commute data underscore 2013-2019 data set. And that is located in this Google folder. And I am going to put the link to that in the chat. And what you'll find in here is you should find a spreadsheet file. And if you are interested in following along with today's example exercises, sort of as I'm doing them, you can download that data set and follow along. That also has a copy of the slides in there as well for today's session. So you can access those from there as well. And so you can download the data set either to your own computer or you can upload it to the MyFSU VLab if you're using the VLab for today's session. All right. Cool. All right, and just to reiterate, we will be sending these slides out that'll have this link to the data set and the recording after the workshop today. All right, so the first thing we are going to do is we are going to import our data set into our Microsoft Excel. And I'm going to be doing a lot of this within the software. The slides that I send will have sort of an overview of what I'm doing sort of in real time. So you sort of have those instructions and bullet points so that you can follow along. And feel free to grab those from the Google Drive as well. But if we go into our Excel, and I'm going to quickly erase these two numbers that we had earlier so that we have a fresh sheet. If we want to import our data set, we're first going to click on the Data tab at the top of our screen. We're going to go over to the Get Data button, click on the little down arrow, and then you'll have several choices for sources on your computer from the cloud where you can download your data set from. So whenever you're working with your data, just select whichever one applies. Here, we're going to select from File. And I have another Excel workbook, so we're going to do this from Workbook. And so if you click on that, that should bring up your sort of file box where you have your different files on your computer. I'm going to select the Commute Data 2013-2019 data set. If you have that, just select wherever that is on your computer. And then click Import. All right, and that's going to bring up another box called our Data Navigator. And this is another one of those moments when I'm going to ask if y'all can see a Data Navigator box on my screen, because this is a pop-up. Awesome. All right, so we have our data navigator. And you'll see within this commute data 2013-2019 data set, I have a couple of different sheets. I have sort of the full data set, and then there's sort of a summary data sheet as well that's sort of reorganized the full data set a little bit. So this navigator will give you sort of a preview of what your data looks like. So this is a good chance to make sure that everything looks good before you upload it into Microsoft Excel. So then to import this into Excel, since we have multiple sheets, we'll want to select this, select multiple items here. Otherwise, it will only let us upload one sheet at a time. So we're going to select both of these. And then if we go down here to load, you'll see this little load arrow. So click on that little arrow and then click load to. And then after load to, we have yet another pop-up. Several pop-ups here. So you'll see this will allow you to select where you want to import this data and how you want to view it. So we're going to import it as a table. So, if you have tables, Excel's really popular for working with tabular data. So that's a very common form to upload to the software. So we're going to select table. And then we're going to check mark new worksheet, which may already be automatically selected. And then we'll hit OK. And there's this little box that sort of pops up on the side that shows us that it's loading the data into our Excel. And then you'll see if you look here, we have our first sheet. So this is our full data set, our commute data 2013-2019, and then this is the summarized form of that that I've sort of reorganized a little bit for some stuff later on in the workshop. I'm going to X out of this because we are not going to need this for the rest of our workshop. And then I'm going to actually change the color of this real quick. This is not something that you have to do. This is something sort of as a personal preference and just so that it's a little bit easier to view. So I'm going to go to table design, click this little down arrow, and then I'm just going to select essentially where we don't have any special effects on our table. So we just have our white background with dark typing, and I'm going to do that here as well. So whenever you're working with tables, you'll see these extra buttons pop up, table design and query, where you're able to sort of do some extra things with your tables, sort of style them a little bit differently, add in headers to this and everything else. All right. So now we have our data imported into Excel. So one thing that you'll notice now that we have our data in, this is a fairly small data set, but sometimes you might be working with data that's hundreds and hundreds of lines long, right? Or even thousands. You might have a really, really large spreadsheet, which if you just keep it as is, it might be hard to remember what those headers are like, right? So sort of what those labels are for your different columns. And the same thing also applies if you're going vertically as well. So Excel has a really nice feature called freeze panes. And this is under our View tab. And what this allows us to do is to freeze a portion of our spreadsheet so that we can keep it visible while we scroll through the rest of the sheet. And this is really, really useful if you're working with data in another part of the spreadsheet, but you still want to know kind of what that data refers to, if you're trying to compare it, or if you're trying to write formulas and the like. So to do that, you can either freeze the top row, you can freeze the first column, or you can freeze a selection of columns and rows. So for our example, we're just going to freeze this top row. So if we click over here on the left-hand side, you'll see if we do that, that highlights our entire first row. And you can do the same thing for columns as well. If you click sort of up here where the column label is, you can highlight the entire column. But if we click row 1, go over to freeze panes, if we then click freeze our top row, you'll see when we scroll down, you'll see that our top row stays visible on the screen, even though we are scrolling through the rest of our data set. And there is sort of a little kind of divider line here. It's really kind of hard to see, but it is there. And if you're working on your own computer, it might be a little bit easier to see that way. So I'm going to go in and do that on our second worksheet as well. I'm going to freeze that top row. So then if we scroll down, we can still see those column labels. So this is a really nice sort of quality of life feature, particularly for if you're working with your larger data sets and to keep track of your data. All right, so now we have our data in, we've frozen our panes so that we keep our column labels. Now we want to go through and sort our data. So often you're going to import a raw data set into Excel. This is often data, that's been collected over several iterations or, several different time periods, such as this. It's been collected from 2013 to 2019, and it's sort of a mixture. And you might want to clean this up a little bit before you start doing further analysis. One way to do that is to sort your data. And to do that, we can go to our data tab, and you'll see this sort button over here, sort of in the middle of the top. So I'm going to click somewhere within our data set, just so that Excel knows that we're working with our data. If we click on sort, you'll see that this highlights by default our entire data set. I don't believe it always did this in older versions, but maybe that's just me misremembering. But now, if you've clicked a cell within your table, it will highlight that entire table, which is nice. So what you can then do is you can sort by, and you can sort by any one of these different columns. So we'll start with geography, but you could also sort by year if you wanted to, average commute time, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So you're first going to click on what you're going to sort by. So we'll go with geography. And then you'll decide what you want to sort on. And there's just a few options for this. Cell values is the default. So it'll look for cell values that are alike. If you choose cell color, it's going to look for cells of the same color if you are color coding your data, or if you're doing font color, etc. We're not doing anything with colors within this data. We've kept it all the same. So we will stick with the sort of default cell values. And then you then select after that how to order those. So the default for our text values are alphabetical order or reverse alphabetical order. You can come up with a custom sorting list as well. For this example, we will choose A to Z. So it'll sort everything starting with an A at the top, then B, C, etc. So if we click OK, what you'll now notice is we've now sorted our data so that everything from Alabama is on the top, all of our data from Florida is after that, all of our data from Georgia is below, and then all of our average data from the United States is at the bottom. So this is sorting by one criterion, but you might often want to sort by multiple criteria, and that is also totally doable. So if we go back into our sort box, each sort of criteria that we have for sorting is what's known as a level. So we only had one level here. There was only one thing, one criteria that we were sorting by. But if we want to add a level or add another criteria, we click this add level button. So it's this sort of green plus button here over at the left. So this will then add another level by which it will sort. And it's going to sort these by whatever order that you have. So if you were to say have geography first, then another criteria, and you were to do this all at once, it would sort it first by geography, then by whatever your second criteria is. If you were to reverse that, it would sort by the first criteria and then geography. And you can also move these up and down by using these arrows here. And then you can also delete levels as well. So we're going to do a second sort by average commute time. We'll use the default cell values. And then here, we're actually going to go from largest to smallest. Just go from the longest commute time to the shortest commute time. So these are our two criteria for how we sort our data. One thing that I didn't mention before is particularly since we have headers and column labels here, you'll want to make sure that this My Data Has Headers button is checked. Here it's checked by default, but sometimes Excel won't pick that up. So if you do have headers, make sure that this is checked, or it might sort those in with the rest of your data as well. So if we then click OK, you'll see now we've still sorted alphabetically. We still have all of our Alabama data, our Florida data, and our Georgia data together. But now within Alabama, we've sorted from the highest time or the longest time to the shortest time. And we've done the same for Florida and the same for Georgia and the US. And I know some of these, the averages are not too far apart, but if you look over here, you'll notice that the years are a little bit different because there were slight variations. So we know that it's sorted by those different highest to lowest times. So that's one way that you can sort your data, work with your data before you do any analysis. And this is good if you want to sort of look at specific subsets of your data and sort of compare those later on. All right, so we've sorted our data. So one other thing to sort of make sure of before we do any computations is to make sure that our self-formatting is correct. And this is really important, particularly for consistency. If you're doing analyses across several different data sets, several different values, it's important to make sure that all of your values, say all of your numerical values, are formatted in the same way and in a way that's appropriate for whatever questions or analyses you're trying to do. So if we look here, so this is our column C. We can format our cells by going up here on the Home tab, sort of in this number section here in the middle. If we click on this drop-down menu, we'll see several different formats that we can use. And not all of these formats are appropriate for every single type of data. So it does depend on what type of data set that you're working with. Like here, we are not talking about currency or monetary values, so we wouldn't select the currency format or the accounting format. We're not talking about dates either, so you would not select those. The default is general, so Excel will just import this as general format. If you want to import this specifically as a number format, this will then default to whatever Excel has for its numerical formats. You see this reduces the number of significant figures and decimal points that you have shown on the screen. You can increase or decrease this as well, and you still get the full value up here in the formula bar. But if you are looking to do analyses with different numerical values that might have different significant figures or decimal places, this could be a possible format. There are other formats that you could use depending on situation. Scientific format is another one that you might commonly see, where you have these as like 2.38 times 10 to the first. So if you're working with scientific data that uses this type of format, that's something else that you can do in Excel. The key thing is just to make sure that all of these different values are consistent across your different spreadsheets, across your different values that you're analyzing. Because if they're not, that might introduce errors into your analysis that might have to go back and work on later on, which is going to cause more time. So we are going to leave it in the general format for today. And these are just sort of the default that you'll see here. You'll see there's a selection for more number formats. If you want to get really specific, Excel has a number of different formats that you can use. And if you click on this screen, you can even select within those formats, like the date format. You can select several different options. So you can get really, really specific with this if you want to. All right. So now I think is going to be another good stopping point. I'm just going to pause real quick, see if anyone has any questions. If you do, please put those in the chat. Otherwise, again, just give me a thumbs up or a green check mark sign, and we'll continue on talk about formulas and functions. All right, awesome. Cool. All right, so I'm going to go back here for just a second into our PowerPoint and do a introduction quickly to formulas and functions. So if you are wanting to perform some sort of computation or analysis, this might be the first thing that you do, is entering in different formulas or functions into Microsoft Excel. And formulas are an expression that calculates a value of a cell. And you're often going to operate on values within a range of cells or multiple cells. Formulas always begin with an equal sign. If you are just entering some values into a cell, that's just going to directly enter those values. If you try and say like B3 minus C3. If you don't have that equal sign into it, it's just going to enter the exact text that you inputted. That equal sign essentially is telling Excel to calculate something. Functions are sort of an extension, sort of a build on from formulas, is that functions are Excel defined formulas. And these sort of eliminate manually entering formulas. So doing like additions, multiplications, and other types of analyses. So it sort of prevents having to like enter all of that out by hand. And it also often gives them either reasonable or human-friendly names so that you know what those are referring to. So if we look at some examples of different formulas, so if we're thinking about addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, you have A1 plus A2, A1 minus A2, etc. I'll show you an example in just a second within the spreadsheet, what these are like. So you see it has that equal sign and then the different cells that you are performing that operation on. And then the function, on the other hand, has a slightly different format. So the general format for any function is the equal sign again, and then whatever function you are performing. And these are just a few examples. There's hundreds of these within Excel. And I'll give some resources at the end where you can look up what different functions are in Excel and how to find those for your specific use case. But you'll have whatever function that you're doing. And then inside of parentheses will be the cell range that you are performing that function on. So you'll have your first cell, your last cell, whatever range that you are doing that. And as I sort of mentioned earlier, you can directly write those functions into the cells themselves, or you can use that formula bar at the top of the screen. So if I go back into our Excel, and let's say we're looking at our spreadsheet here, I'm going to go over to some of these empty columns over on the right-hand side. And let's say we want to look at the first two cells here in our Florida data set. So that's in cell C9 and cell C10. So I'm going to perform our addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So I can hit that equal sign. And then the first way that we can select our cells that we want to perform these operations on is we can hit equals and then directly select those cells. So you'll see C9 pop up into your cell. And then I'm going to hit plus, and then I will select C10. And then once you've written your function, if you hit enter, you'll see here is our value. And if you look again up at the top, you'll see in that formula bar, it writes out what our formula is. So this is one way to also check to make sure that you have written the correct formula, perform the correct operation. If we go down here now and we say want to do subtraction, I can hit our equal sign. And instead of selecting the cells, I can actually write out C9. So that'll highlight our cell C9. And then I just hit the minus sign, cell C10. So I have C9 minus C10. We hit enter. So this is our addition, this is our subtraction. Now for this one, we'll go up to the formula bar and we'll type in C9. And multiplication is that little star button. So it's above the 8 on your keyboard. So if you hit Shift and then the 8 key, you'll hit the multiplication sign. and then cell C10. Enter. And then for our division, I'm going to go back to selecting C9 and then slash C10. So slash is our division sign within Excel, and then enter. So that's doing our different formulas within Excel. So that's doing those manually. And we were just doing 2 cells, right? So you can imagine that if you were doing these operations over several cells or hundreds of cells, that's going to take a long time, right, to write all of that out. And that's where our functions come into play. All right. So for this function example, I showed on our slides just a minute ago some of the different functions. Now we're going to do an example calculating averages. And as I mentioned earlier, this will be really helpful. We sorted our data into our different sections earlier. This will help us sort of see kind of where we're going with this a little bit easier. But we're going to average our entire commute time column, and then we're going to average this by each subset of the data. So our Alabama data, our Florida data, and our Georgia data. So for that, we're going to calculate the average. And I'm going to label this over here at the bottom so that we can keep track of our data. This is also something that I highly recommend if you're doing analyses to sort of label the different operations, label what you're doing within your data sets. So to calculate an average, we can hit equals, and then one way to get formulas is you can start typing in something that you might think is a formula. So if you're typing in an average, I type in AV, and then you can select whatever formula function that you're wanting to use. So we have our average. And to calculate this, we can either type out our range within the cell, or we can highlight. So you see here, we're going all the way from cell C2 to C29. So if we type in our C2 colon C29, this will highlight this entire column here. And then close our parentheses, and then we hit enter. And we'll see this gives us our average for all of our different cells. So this gives us the average of the entire column. But now let's say we want to get averages of different subsets. So if we want an average of, let's say, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. So to do that, we're going to use a slightly different function. So this function is going to be called average if. So their average if function finds the average for a specific group of cells that we can give a specific set of criteria to. So we can go through our data set, and it's pretty straightforward here based on the size of our data set, which ones are Alabama, which ones are Florida, which ones are Georgia. But if we didn't have this sorted, or if we had a really large amount of values, this average if function is very helpful. And so to do that, we're going to do is type our average if, and then we're going to select the set of data, the cell range to search, And so here, since we are searching for Alabama data, right, we're going to highlight all of these cells. So we're going to highlight all of our text value, all of our geography. So it's going to come up here and say this is our entire commute data 2013-2019 geography column. You can also type out D2 to D29. I'm not sure why it specifies this now in sort of newer versions of Excel. But this is the range that we are going to search. Now we can put in what criteria we're going to search. So now we can type in Alabama and make sure this is in quotes, especially since we're looking at text data. So this is going to search all of our cells in column D, so D2 through D29. It's going to look for all of the parts of the data that correspond to Alabama. And then we can also, now we can look at our cell range to be averaged. So now we go back over here. We highlight our column C. And so again, this comes up with here. And I think I might need a comma here. All right, so for this function, there are 3 things that you need. So make sure to have all 3 of those. The first one is, again, the cell range that we're searching. The second one is the segment name. And then the third one is the data that we want to average. So if we then hit enter, you'll see now this has given us a different average value. So it's looked at all of the data that corresponds to Alabama. And then it's looked at those average commute times, and it's pulled all of that information. So again, this is really, really useful if you're wanting to sort of look at different subsets of your data, and particularly if you have larger data sets as well. So we can do this for each of our different sets of data. If we do average if, we can select our entire column D. Going to highlight that. Now we want to look for Florida. And now we are going to select our column C. Close parentheses, and we get our average for Florida. And you'll see again, we see those up here in our formula bar as well. And now for Georgia, same process. Highlight this one. We're going to type in Georgia, make sure that we have it spelled correctly. Then our column C. All right, so now we have our different averages. One thing that you can also do, which I could have done to save a little bit of time, is you can copy and paste these as well. So I could have taken this average if from here, clicked on our formula bar, sort of pasted this into here, and then just changed our criteria to Florida, since our other values that we're looking at are the same, which might save you a little bit of time as well. So that's one example how we can utilize different functions to perform different calculations in Excel. All right. Awesome. All right. All right, now I'm going to go back into our PowerPoint. So there's sort of a walkthrough on how to do this, sort of walking through the different example. I know this was several different things to sort of keep track of. And so like the first time or two you do it, if you haven't used this function before, might be a little confusing to remember, but I've sort of laid that out here onto how you would perform this type of example. All right. So in thinking about other ways that we can perform data analysis within Excel, another feature that we can use that can be really useful is something called the Analysis Tool Pack. And the Analysis Tool Pack is an add-in for Microsoft Excel that allows us to do data and statistical analysis within the Excel program. Gives us access to a variety of statistical functions without necessarily needing to manually enter formulas and functions like we just did previously, or set up multi-step processes. Now, the tool pack is automatically included with each version of Excel, but it is not automatically enabled. So it is not enabled by default, but it is included as an add-on. And it can also be a bit tricky to find once it is enabled. So we're going to go through how you actually find that, enable it, and where you can find it once you've enabled that tool pack. And one important thing to note is that this analysis tool pack only works on one worksheet at a time. So if you're doing analysis over multiple worksheets, you'll need to do your analysis on each one of those. Right now, the way they have that built is that it only works on that one worksheet at a time. So if we go into our Excel, and I have these instructions in the slide as well. So if we go into our Excel and to load our analysis tool back, the first thing that you'll do is go up to the File tab within Excel. And you'll see when you open the File tab, you'll want to go all the way down to the bottom and select Options. So if you select Options, there should be another pop-up box called Excel Options. And I'm going to ask, this might be the last time I ask this, just to make sure we can all see that box so that you can all follow along as I'm sort of showing how to enable this. So if you let me know if you can see that Excel Options box. Awesome, I got a thumbs up, so that is a yes. All right, so Zoom is working pretty good for this stuff today. All right, so if we're on our Excel options box, we'll go down now to add-ins. So that's our option down here at the bottom. And then we're going to go to manage. And then we want to make sure that Excel add-ins is selected. There's a few different things that you can select. We'll make sure our Excel add-ins are selected. And then we'll hit go. And then you'll see another box that'll sort of have the different add-ins that are available for Excel. Some of these come automatically with Excel. Some of these might be add-ins from other programs that you have installed on your computer. But this is where you'll find those add-ins for Excel. And you'll see at the very top, we have this analysis tool pack. So we just want to select here this analysis tool pack right here. We won't be utilizing the VBA functions for the analysis tool pack, just utilizing this. So you can say it gives us a very, very quick definition, sort of a very brief summary of what we already talked about. But we'll make sure to check this And then once we have our analysis toolpack box checkmarked, we'll hit OK. And so now you've done that, and you might think, well, didn't really do anything, did it? We saw it maybe load a little bit. And now we are going to find where it put it. So if we go back to our data tab, you'll notice here, sort of at the far right, we have a new box. We have this new analysis box. And this data analysis tab is our analysis toolpack. So this is where it will upload that once you upload that into your Excel. All right, and so as I mentioned before, your analysis toolpack gives you access to a variety of statistical functions. You can see which functions are available if you select this data analysis box. And then there's another pop-up window that will appear. It's taking a little bit of a moment to appear. I hope that comes up. All right, there we go. All right, so you'll see there's several different types of statistical tests that you can run with your data, all the way from ANOVA to sort of descriptive or summary statistics, to doing histograms, rank and percentile, and different types of tests. Now, we won't have time necessarily to go over every single test and how to do those, but there are some resources on how to set those up for your data that I will share at the end if you want to dive a little bit more into some of these specific analysis types. It is important to note, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention these, there are a few caveats to using some of these as opposed to using another statistical analysis program such as Python or R that you might use or come across if you're doing statistical analysis. So for each of these tests in Excel, it often requires you to arrange the data in a certain way, to set up your columns and rows in certain ways. So you might be doing a lot of copying or pasting or sorting if you're going to be doing multiple tests. So that might cause you to spend a little more time. And certain tests can only be performed on one column or one part of your data at a time, which can make doing some of these on more complex data sets more challenging. The final thing to note, and this might be a little quality of life thing, but Excel doesn't necessarily log what you are doing, so sort of logging your process. So I encourage you, if you are doing several tests with the analysis toolpack, you sort of keep track, whether it's in another document or in a notebook, kind of what tests you are doing, what sets of data that you're doing them on, what order you're doing them in case you need to go back and look for any errors or reperform this analysis. But this is a really, really handy tool. If you're primarily using Excel or need to quickly perform some of these different statistical analyses or tests, this can be a really great asset. All right. So I am going to X out of that. And I am now actually going to go over to our commute summary tab. This is kind of just sat here for most of the workshop. But we'll use this in sort of our last couple of sets of examples here. So we're going to get some summary statistics or descriptive statistics on our data. And this, in case you haven't heard that term or utilized that before, or descriptive statistics are really looking to get us an idea of the general trends from our data set. It allows us to get a general summary and description of the data. So to begin, we go over to our data analysis tab. We click on our data analysis. Now we can select what type of tool that we wish to use. So we'll click on descriptive statistics. We'll hit OK. And now we get to input whatever range of data that we want to perform this analysis on. So the first thing we'll do is select our input range, and this is the data that we want to perform analysis on. So you can either write this in directly, or you can hit this little arrow and then select that. So I am going to select our column for Florida data. So B1 through B8. And we'll make sure now we are doing this by columns. So we'll make sure this says grouped by columns. And then also make sure that you have checked labels in the first row so that Excel knows when they're performing analyses that this is a label and not to include that in the analysis. You'll then have a few different options for where this data is going to be outputted. You can output this in another cell within your example. You can output this within a new worksheet as well. For the sake of simplicity, I'll show both ways, but I'm going to start with output range. And here, it wants us to click our up arrow first. All right. So click our up arrow, and I am just going to select cell G2. When you're selecting the output range, you don't necessarily have to select like an entire range. You can if you want. But what it'll do is, since we've grouped this by columns and you've selected this column, it will output it in column G, starting with our cell G2. And then here we're wanting summary statistics. So we'll make sure to check our summary statistics box. And if you're looking for any of these other types of statistical analyses, you can do that, but we'll stick with summary statistics and then hit OK. And now you'll see the output. I am going to grab the little bar in column G and sort of make this cell a little bit bigger so we can actually read it. So just grab this little arrow up here and move that over. And so this is the output when you are looking at summary statistics in Excel. It sort of gives you an idea of the kind of tendency of your data. So sort of the mean or average, the median or midpoint of your data. There's an NA by mode. Since mode is looks for the value that occurs the most frequently. And within our data set, all of these values only occur once. So there really isn't a mode. So you get this sort of hashtag, we'll call it NA. So then in addition to looking at those different tendencies, your summary statistics also talk about sort of measures of variability, like sort of the range, the minimum and maximum of your particular data, the standard deviation. And then we'll also kind of talk about, how symmetrical this data is. So if you wanted to do like a data distribution, you could look at sort of the skewedness and kurtosis, if that's something that works for whatever you're trying to analyze. So this is what Excel will output whenever you are doing summary statistics. So just kind of a general overview of your data set. We can do this for another column. So if we go back to our data analysis, descriptive statistics, I'm going to look at Georgia now. So we'll select C1 through C8. Our columns are selected, labels in our first row. I am now actually going to output this in a new worksheet. And this might be something that you want to do if you're wanting to sort of organize your data. You have many different sets of data that you're wanting to do this analysis on. You might want each of these within a separate worksheet so that you can keep track of those and organize those. You can give that a separate title. So we'll say Georgia data, and we'll hit OK. And so now we see we've got a new worksheet with our Georgia data, and we have similar values to similar different types of tests to before, and you can look through those. So this is just one example of what we can do with the analysis tool pack. Like I said, there's several different tests on here, and I encourage you to sort of play around with these, utilize these, see what's right for you. All right, so before I move on just really quickly to the final portion of our workshop, I'm just going to pause real quick. See if anybody has any questions on any of that. Again, feel free to drop those in the chat. If not, we'll just quickly finish up by talking about kind of charts and graphs within Excel. All right. Awesome. All right, so now to finish up, this will be the last section of the workshop. We're going to talk about charts and graphs. So we've talked about some of the ways in which you can analyze and work with your data in Excel. And one thing that you also will likely want to do with your data after you've done different statistical analyses with it, sort of like we've shown previously, is you'll want to visualize that data, whether you're presenting it or writing a report on that data. Utilizing different data visualization tools is really important, and Excel has a lot of different ways that you can do that. So thinking about how you want to go about selecting, choosing which type of chart or graph that you want to use. And this really applies to a lot of different programs, not just to Excel. But sort of thinking about your purpose and what you're trying to display or say with your graph. There'll often be a lot of different components to your data, but sort of think about what you're trying to get your viewers or your data consumer, what you want to tell them about that data. Also pick a graph that makes sense. As we'll see in Excel, there's a lot of different options. Not all of those options are necessarily appropriate for each type of data. So pick one that makes sense for the data, and then use the chart ribbon to help build your graph. Over time, Microsoft Excel has added a lot of different features that sort of help you kind of select which graph that you want and which one might be best for your data set. This is sort of a double-sided coin. This is a really, really great feature, but you still also need to think about what type of graph you want to use for your data set, which ones make sense. Only you can figure that out. All right, so our chart ribbon is going to actually be found under the Insert tab. So if we go back to our Excel, and we go over now to our Insert tab, sort of in the middle, you'll see this charts box. And this is what we can use to figure out which type of plot we want to use for our data. You'll see there's several that are already here by default, so different categories of graphs. So like your column or bar charts, your line or area charts, your pie charts. So if you know which one of these you want to use, you can select this these little down arrows on each of the buttons. You can also go here to recommended charts, and that's what we are going to do. So we're going to select our data, and I did that by sort of highlighting all of the data here, from column A to E going through. And now let's say I want to find a good chart for this data. So I'm going to click on recommended charts. And now you'll see a few different examples that Excel thinks might be good for your data. So you'll see it'll start with a line chart. There's a bar chart, several different types of bar charts. You'll see a connected scatter plot. So you'll see there's several different options. You can also go to this All Charts tab, and this is another way to view all those different types of graphs, which you can also access directly from Excel. And you'll see you can actually get a nice preview of what each of those would look like. But if we go to our recommended charts, I'm actually going to utilize this scatter plot. We're sort of wanting to see how each of these sets of data changes over time. You'll see we have each of our years here. We have our kind of average minutes for commute time over here. So we can view those kind of relationships between our data. So if I hit OK, what this will then do is it'll output this first right on top of our page. It'll plop it right there. And you'll see it'll also give us a couple of new tabs. So we have this chart design tab and this format tab. One thing that I like to do is to move that chart to an alternate worksheet or location where I can more easily see it and do any sort of manipulation. And so I'm going to move that to a new sheet. And I'm going to call this commute plot. Hit OK. And now you'll see it moves this to its own worksheet. And you can much easier go in and manipulate this data. And there's several different things you can do to this. We can give this a title. So I can just highlight this text box and call this commute time. If we want to select different things to go in, you can go into this little chart element box. So this little plus box at the top right-hand corner. We can look at what our axes are. Do we have horizontal or vertical axes? And I'm going to actually click on more options. So again, if I was in that plus box, go to our axes, we get this little arrow, select more options. And this will allow us to actually go in and sort of manipulate this from here. And so I'm going to take out the kind of extraneous values on the side. So if we want to just say from 2013 to 2019. All right, so now you'll see that it automatically took those out. It cleaned that up a little bit. We can go down to labels. And we can see where that is. If we want to put in axis titles, we can check this axis titles box. And this will automatically bring up a title box for our vertical and our horizontal axes. So this is year. This is our time in minutes. If I can actually get that to select. All right. So those are a couple of quick manipulations. I would do more, but we don't have a lot of time left. But you can go in and look at your chart title. I just took it off. So I'm going to put that back on. But there's several different ways you can manipulate your plots to make sure all of your different values are labeled. If you're within your plot, you can also go to this add chart element box over here as well. And then hit this more axis options selection. And this will allow you to do pretty much the same thing over here. So it'll bring up this box on the right-hand side as well. So there's a couple different ways that you can get into that ribbon. All right. And with that, so you'll see I have some nice little animations in here, actually. So you can actually go in here and look at this. And it'll have sort of the example that we just talked about, so you can follow along with that if you wish. And then that is actually the end of our workshop. We made pretty good time today. So I know we covered quite a bit of material, quite a bit of different things that you can do in Microsoft Excel. If you want to practice this more, if you want more information on some of the things we talked about today, there are several videos and tutorials out there directly from Microsoft itself or from the community. LinkedIn Learning, which we have access to here at FSU, has a lot of great resources and courses for learning Excel. Stack Overflow is a really good community site if you are looking to troubleshoot issues that you're having with Excel. I mentioned a link to the different functions in Excel. Here's a link directly from Microsoft where you can go in and look at all those different functions and what they do. I also put in a link if you want more information on how to work with the analysis tool pack and how to set up some of those different tests. But then always, if you have any questions on any of this, if you're looking for some more specific assistance for a project or a class assignment that you're working on, if you want to know like some more resources to use, or if you're kind of looking into like what different functions in Excel might you use, your friendly librarians here at FSU Libraries are always happy to help. I put my contact information up on the screen if you'd like to get a hold of me at any point after today's session. We're always available, always happy to help. With that, thank you very much for attending, sticking out to the end. Really appreciate y'all coming. You all have a wonderful rest of your day and evening.